I'm going to go ahead and introduce the presenters. My colleague Emily Schoenfelder, 4-H Youth Development Educator, will be presenting along with myself. My name is Judy Schmidt, University of Illinois Extension educator as well. And we also have another colleague with us on today as well. Her name is Anita Wilkinson, and she is our marketing coordinator, and she will be running the tech and answering any questions you have in the chat. So if you're having any technology issues or want to ask a question that you don't want to put in a group chat, you can ask her privately. Okay, so thank you for being on. We're going to be talking about developmental relationships today, and I first just want to go over what our goals are for today. So the goals today are to understand the characteristics that make relationships developmental. We also want to become familiar with some of the research on developmental relationships. And we know that a lot of people recognize the importance of developmental relationships. We know that that's important, but we don't often talk about how we get to there. Like, what do we do to actually implement this in our classrooms? So our third goal is to develop practices to build those developmental relationships with students in the classroom. And because we really want to recognize the foundational importance of relationships, we want to start by taking a minute for you to do kind of an interactive activity. And I want you to think about the role that relationships have played for you in your development. So we're going to do a little chat time now. So if you could put in the chat box, think about an adult in your life who was influential while you were growing up. What did they do that made them influential? So go ahead and just type that in the chat box. Okay, so I'm starting to see them come in. People are saying, believed in me, teach, listen, and relate tasks to my interests and strengths. Cared. Believe in me when I didn't believe in myself. Encouraged. Guided me with values. Shared wisdom. Taught me life skills and encouraged me. Was funny. My teacher encouraged me and envisioned a bright future in college for me when I was a 5th grader. Listened and encouraged, got to know me as a person. They practiced what they preached. My mother was in 5 children with my father and worked full-time when my youngest was in school, encouraged me. I had 2 teachers that believed in me with how well I learned, always showed me respect, believed me, encouraged me. Parents, unconditional support. I was influenced by a teacher who listened to me, engaged with me, believed in me, was creative, and not talking at me. Teachers, they instilled a love of lifelong learning. Grandmother encouraged me to be creative. These are great. High school English teacher, patient, understanding, spiritual guidance, offered listening, lots of listening, showed me that she cared. Grandmother was a big influence, helped me learn how to become independent. Good example of someone who always pushed forward, informed me with respect to questions I had about the world, believed in me, told me I could be anything I wanted when I grew up, and always told me to never take the easy road. My high school history teacher spoke to us like we were adults, asked for our opinions on controversial topics, made us feel like our input was always important. My mom, they cared about my feelings and ideas. Great. So, we heard a lot of things in these comments about listening and caring. And I think that's one of the things that we often automatically think of. When we think of developmental relationships, that's the first thing we think of is caring relationships and that feeling like someone matters. But there are actually a lot of other things that fall into the developmental relationships as well. And some of you talked about those in the chat as well, like people who challenged you, who pushed you to do things, who helped you achieve your goals and showed you things about the world. So we're going to actually talk about 5 different categories, and we want to recognize that a lot of the things we're sharing today, and Emily will talk about this more in the research, are from the Search Institute. So you know, this is a huge topic that we could spend a lot more time than we're going to have today about. So we encourage you to check out the information that the Search Institute has available, because they have a lot of information about developmental relationships. And even this particular activity that we just did, they have a little bit more in-depth tool that you could use with your fellow teachers in your school, or other people that you work with, that just help you think a little bit more in depth about all these different categories and how people have influenced you. And it just gives you kind of a chance to go a little bit more in depth with it than we have time to today. But I encourage you to check that out at some point, and we'll give you that reference at the end of the session. So we're going to kind of go into 5 characteristics that make a developmental relationship. The first one is express care, which we talked about a little bit as being the one that most people think about. Emily, can you, there we go. So the first characteristic of expressing care makes you think of someone that you can trust, makes you feel like you are valued, someone who enjoys being with you, who praises you for your efforts and really pays attention to you. So you can think about somebody in your life who has done that for you, but you can also think about how you have shown that to others. So how have you shown that to the students in your classroom? You know, how have you built trust with them? How do you show them that you believe in them? Those are all things that fall into the expressing care. The next characteristic is challenging growth. So we talked a little bit about this, as those of you put things in the chat box. These are people that you would think about who pushed you to try something new, to help you learn from what maybe you did wrong or quite master, somebody who helped you live up to your potential, and somebody that, you know, kind of stretched you in an area that maybe you wouldn't normally have tried, and helped you kind of reflect on what maybe didn't go the way that you wanted it to go. So this second characteristic is challenging growth. The next characteristic, think about people who guided you through hard systems, helped you navigate things that maybe you were unfamiliar with, stood up for you when you needed it, empowered you to have a voice maybe when you didn't. Also helps you set limits and boundaries and advocate for you when you needed somebody in your corner. So this one is providing support. So thinking of someone who really supported you in a variety of ways. The next characteristic is thinking about someone who created opportunities for you to take action and lead, someone who took you seriously. People mentioned that in the chat, that they treated you as an adult. They let you have conversations about controversial topics, you know, all of those kind of things, involved you in decisions that affected you. That's a really big one, you know, letting you have a voice, treated you fairly, helped you with problem solving, giving you a chance to lead, collaborate together. And so this one is about sharing power. We talk about it in a lot of different ways. In the 4-H world, we talk about youth-adult partnerships. You know, I'm sure you talk about it in different ways in the education world as well, but that idea of working together to come to a common solution. Okay, and then the last characteristic is thinking about, Emily, can you switch to there? Thank you. thinking about someone who inspired you to see possibilities for the future. So I loved somebody in the chat talked about somebody who had a vision for them for going to college when they were in 5th grade. You know, that's pretty powerful for someone to believe in you and share that vision at such a young age. Introduce you to other people who could help you grow. That's a big one as well, helping make those connections, especially for kids who may not have connections, you know, especially thinking about higher education or connections to the workforce, people who can help you learn about people who do the kinds of things that you may want to do, expose you to new places, experience, and ideas. So this characteristic is expanding possibilities. So in the activity that I mentioned earlier, sometimes they have the people think of people in each of these categories, and they may be the same person. For you, they may you may have somebody who shows up a lot in all of these different categories, or they may be different people. So you may have somebody who really was someone who expressed care and provided you support, but maybe they weren't the same person who challenged you, you know, so maybe you have family members at home who were your support system and cared for you, but maybe you have a teacher or somebody that really pushed you academically and maybe introduced you to things you hadn't experienced in that way. So that's kind of a brief overview of the different characteristics that make up developmental relationships. We now want to show you a video that is Rita Pearson, and she is someone who's in the education field for many years of her life. You may have seen this before. It's a TED Talk. It's really great, and it's called Every Kid Needs a Champion. So when we do this video, what we want you to be thinking about is in what ways do you see the educator, the person talking, fostering developmental relationships? So as she talks and reflects on her experience in the educational system, what characteristics that we just talked about of developmental relationships do you recognize? So we're gonna go ahead and watch this video. It's a short video, and just you can put those in the chat or write them down and put them at the end, whatever is easiest for you. But just be thinking about the ways in which you see this educator fostering developmental relationships.
I have spent my entire life either at the schoolhouse, on the way to the schoolhouse, or talking about what happens in the schoolhouse. Both my parents were educators. My maternal grandparents were educators. And for the past 40 years, I've done the same thing. And so needless to say, over those years, I've had a chance to look at education reform from a lot of perspectives. Some of those reforms have been good, some of them have been not so good. And we know why kids drop out. We know why kids don't learn. It's either poverty, low attendance, negative peer influences. We know why. But one of the things that we never discuss, or we rarely discuss, is the value and importance of human connection. Relationships. James Comer says that no significant learning can occur without a significant relationship. George Washington Carver says all learning is understanding relationships. Everyone in this room has been affected by a teacher or an adult. For years, I have watched people teach. I have looked at the best and I've looked at some of the worst. A colleague said to me one time, they don't pay me to like the kids. They pay me to teach a lesson. The kids should learn it. I should teach it. They should learn it. Case closed. Well, I said to her, you know, kids don't learn from people they don't like. She said, that's just a bunch of hooey. And I said to her, well, your year is going to be long and arduous, dear. Needless to say, it was. Some people think that you can either have it in you to build a relationship or you don't. I think Stephen Covey had the right idea. He said you ought to just throw in a few simple things. like seeking first to understand as opposed to being understood. Simple things like apologizing. You ever thought about that? Tell a kid you're sorry, they're in shock. I taught a lesson once on ratios. I'm not real good with math, but I was working on it. And I got back and looked at that teacher edition. I taught the whole lesson wrong. So I came back to class the next day and I said, look, guys, I need to apologize. I taught the whole lesson wrong. I'm so sorry. They said, that's okay, Miss Pearson. You were so excited. We just let you go. I have had classes that were so low, so academically deficient that I cried. I wondered, how am I going to take this group in 9 months from where they are to where they need to be? And it was difficult. It was awfully hard. How do I raise the self-esteem of a child and his academic achievement at the same time? One year I came up with a bright idea. I told all my students, you were chosen to be in my class. Because I am the best teacher and you are the best students, they put us all together so we could show everybody else how to do it. One of the students said, really? I said, really? We have to show the other classes how to do it. So when we walk down the hall, people will notice us. So you can't make noise, you just have to strut. And I gave him a saying to say, I am somebody. I was somebody when I came. I'll be a better somebody when I leave. I am powerful and I am strong. I deserve the education that I get here. I have things to do, people to impress, and places to go. And they said, yeah. You say it long enough, it starts to be a part of you. And so, I gave a quiz, 20 questions. Student missed 18. I put a +2 on this paper and a big smiley face. He said, Miss Pearson, is this an F? I said, yes. He said, then why'd you put a smiley face? I said, because you on the roll. You got 2 right, you didn't miss them all. I said, and when we review this, won't you do better? He said, yes, ma'am, I can do better. You see, -18 sucks all the life out of you. +2 said, I ain't all bad. For years, I watched my mother take the time at recess to review, go on home visits in the afternoon, buy combs and brushes and peanut butter and crackers to put in her desk drawer for kids that needed to eat, and a washcloth and some soap for the kids who didn't smell so good. See, it's hard to teach kids who stink. And kids can be cruel. And so she kept those things in her desk, and years later, after she retired, I watched some of those same kids come through and say to her, you know, Miss Walker, you made a difference in my life. You made it work for me. You made me feel like I was somebody when I knew at the bottom I wasn't. And I want you to just see what I've become. And when my mama died 2 years ago at 92, there were so many former students at her funeral. It brought tears to my eyes, not because she was gone, but because she left a legacy of relationships that could never disappear. Can we stand to have more relationships? Absolutely. Will you like all your children? Of course not. And you know your toughest kids are never absent. Never. You won't like them all, and the tough ones show up for a reason. It's the connection, it's the relationships. And while you won't like them all, the key is they can never, ever know it. So teachers become great actors and great actresses, and we come to work when we don't feel like it, and we listen to policy that doesn't make sense, and we teach anyway. We teach anyway because that's what we do. Teaching and learning should bring joy. How powerful would our world be if we had kids who were not afraid to take risks, who were not afraid to think, and who had a champion? Every child deserves a champion, an adult who will never give up on them, who understands the power of connection and insists that they become the best that they can possibly be. Is this job tough? You betcha. Oh God, you betcha. But it is not impossible. We can do this. We're educators. We're born to make a difference. Thank you so much.
So I love that video because she's so powerful when she talks and inspiring. And I love what everybody has been putting in the chat. You know, she really hits on a lot of those different areas, you know, from the very first point she made about apologizing to students and how powerful that is when you admit that you were wrong and that you're human too. And just lots of things you mentioned in here: supporting and guiding through hard times, standing up and advocating for learners, empowering. You know, she talked about that a lot, the chant that she had for them. Lots of comments in here about empowering, providing support. Every child deserves a champion. So true. I love that. Expanding possibilities of who we are and what we can do. So yeah, I just think this is a really powerful video that really looks at a lot of the elements of developmental relationships and just really sets a good tone. And I think, you know, one of the things that really resonated with me is just the intentionality with which she addressed it. You know, she talked about like remembering her mom, being prepared by having that stuff in her drawer, and, you know, thinking ahead of time of, you know, how you're going to interact with the students. So I just think this is a good video to just lift your spirits and encourage you in all of these different areas. So with that, thank you for all of your comments and feel free to continue putting those in there. We're going to turn it over to Emily, and she's going to talk a little bit about the research behind developmental relationships.
Yeah, thank you. So, you know, kind of as Judy said at the beginning, like, we all know that this is important, but there has been more and more research coming out saying exactly why and exactly how these things help and make a difference. So we're just going to hit the tip of the iceberg on this. And as Judy said, a lot of this comes out from the Search Institute, but we're going to take a second and look at a couple of other definitions as well. And then we're going to jump in and look at the benefits of this and what the actual impacts that we see from developmental relationships, what the situation looks like right now, and some of the barriers to doing this work. So the Search Institute has the framework that is the 5 characteristics that we talked about. And we kind of feel like it is not only the most actionable, but also the most widely used at the moment, kind of in the academic field that is researching kind of youth development and education. But there are a couple of other people who put forth really good definitions as well. And I just thought it was interesting to see that even though they set out different characteristics, they really overlap well, and they're kind of intertwined. So Beverly wrote an article, and she says that developmental relationships, and I should say that the context there is mostly in a mentoring relationship, but the article says that developmental relationships are an evolutionary process via a recursive stream of progressive consciousness and action that builds support, trust, confidence, risk-taking, and visible positive transformation through dialogue. So I think that that one is interesting in that, as I said, there's a lot of parallels, right? So they say specifically about providing support, which is also very present in the Search Institute framework, but building trust can be very similar to like expressing care. And the risk-taking component, that could include several of the facets, like challenging growth or expanding possibilities. So there's some overlap there that we see, that it's not just necessarily creating an emotional attachment, but there is a broader context of developmental relationships. And then there is a Lee and Julian article say that developmental relationships are characterized by reciprocal human interactions that embody an enduring emotional attachment, progressively more complex patterns of joint activity, and a balance of power that gradually shifts from the developed person in favor of the developing person. And so I think, again, that those really overlap with the Search Institute's framework. So emotional attachment can have kind of that direct, or I guess emotional attachment and shifting power have direct comparisons to expressing care and, again, sharing power kind of respectively. And then reciprocal interactions and those increasingly complex interactions or activity, those can be really similar to kind of an intertwined or combination of providing support, challenging growth, and expanding possibilities. And Lee and Julian talk a lot about scaffolding as well, which kind of goes back to that challenging growth and providing support. One of the examples that they use a lot is, teaching an infant how to walk. Like you start off holding them completely, and then maybe you're just strongly holding their hand so that they can kind of get a feel for it. And as the child becomes more competent and capable of walking, your control as a parent or as a caregiver gets less and less, but you provide that support and you encourage them to continue to take steps. And that's kind of the analogy that they use to go through the whole process. And again, that's very similar to the framework that we're using. Now, the benefits are almost innumerable. I had such a hard time making this slide in particular because I didn't know what to focus on. So the Search Institute has put out that the number of relationships and the strength of those relationships makes a difference. And so the higher number of strong relationships a young person has, the bigger impacts they see in a variety of places. And those could be relationships with parents, which is where we kind of see the strongest relationships in most cases, but it can also be with care providers, it can be with program providers like coaches or out of school time educators, with teachers, of course. And they look at relationships with peers, which are very significant, especially in adolescents as well. And with all of these, or with the increased number and strength of relationship, they show links to increases in all sorts of outcomes. Some of the ones that I've listed, like academic motivations, grade point averages, engagement and learning, positive associations with school, like perceiving school as having a better climate, all of those things are linked to relationships or better relationships with teachers specifically. But with other relationships in their lives, there are significant benefits as well. So civic engagement and a personal responsibility for helping others, showing more respect, self-confidence, developing life skills, like all of those things are shown to increase and improve with more and stronger developmental relationships across the board. In school, again, there are decreased behavioral issues, and I think that they kind of link that to the perception of the school climate and those feelings of connectedness to school. Like, they are less likely to behave in negative ways because they have those positive influences. And they're less likely to engage in risk-taking behavior or potentially dangerous behaviors. The Lee and Julian article that I referenced earlier also basically says that this is the key for any program that is looking at at-risk youth. Like, developmental relationships are the key component. Like, they're the active ingredient in making these programs work and helping these young people to be successful, which I think is really powerful. And one of the examples that they gave was of a Russian orphanage. And this orphanage was kind of very institutional and didn't have a lot of time for those relationships. And they retrained their staff in order to just in basic caregiving, like dressing, feeding, bathing, in basic caregiving with these young people, with these children, they tried to infuse that with more relationship building, right? Like just more personal connections, more opportunities to expand possibilities and share power, all of those things. And they found marked increases in almost every developmental area. And one of the things that I thought was most interesting is that even though the medical care of these children didn't change and their nutrition didn't change, their physical growth increased with relationships. So we always think about, kind of the socio-emotional elements or the psychological benefits of relationships, but there are physical benefits too, which I think is amazing. And one other really positive thing is that they found that caregivers, when they were intentional about developing these relationships, the caregivers or the teachers or the adults in the relationships had fewer instances or fewer perceived instances of anxiety and depression as well. So it's kind of the definition of a win-win situation. That said, across the board, about 1 in 5 young people report having no developmental relationships, no strong relationships in their life, which is pretty staggering. Another 18% so have only one. So 40% of the youth population on average really has not many of these relationships to fall back on. The relationships tend to be strongest with parents and with friends, and that balance kind of shifts as the young person ages. So at 6th grade, their relationships with parents are much stronger, but by the time they graduate, by the time they reach 12th grade, those relationship dynamics have shifted to peers being kind of the most influential people, which is probably typical to what we would expect. And that relationship, that decline in the strength of relationships or developmental relationships that we see with adolescents and their parents, that trend continues with teachers as well, right? So as students are younger, they feel that relationship more deeply or see that more deeply than as they get older. And teachers and program providers, out of school time program providers, are seen to challenge growth the most. Like that's the area that they really excel in. Expanding possibilities seems to be done to a lesser extent, or the young people perceive that to a lesser extent. And that is not, it's only slightly more with expressing care. So those are kind of areas that the research has shown we need to, we as educators can start to work on. Now, we know that this is really hard work, even though we know relationships are important, right? We know that those are key factors and things that we want to do and things that really feed us as educators. It's hard, and there's a lot of things that might be standing in the way of that. So one of those things is that it's not necessarily something that comes naturally, right? And a lot of times we assume that because we work with young people, we have that natural affinity for developing relationships, and that's not always the case. But more than that, everyone assumes that it is, and so we're not given the tools and the techniques and the strategies or the time to make that a priority, and that makes it really hard. We've got all of these expectations in our classrooms and in our lives to get things done and to hit curriculum and standards, but developing relationships is vitally important, and we don't have the tools or the time to do that. And that kind of jumps to the second point. We're not given that as a priority, so the time, we just may not have it. It's also influenced, or our ability to develop these relationships is also influenced by our understanding of the climate that we're working in, right? So if we have a situation or we're in a school that we feel is kind of toxic or seems like an unsafe or kind of burdensome environment as a whole, or this organizational culture is troublesome, we won't be as successful at developing those relationships, right? So we have to be very aware of that and understand that that's a good reason to start to improve connections amongst teachers, amongst colleagues, so that we can then kind of allow that to help us build relationships with our students as well. And then finally, it's just hard because there's such a toll, right? We see so many kiddos and we don't see them for long, right? We might have a year with them, we might have less time with them. And if we are seeing 150 kids a day, it's really hard to give an emotional investment into all of them, or to take the time and the energy into throwing that into each and every kid. That's just it. We burn out from that, right? We have compassion fatigue. And so those are things that we know are standing in the way and that we know we have to overcome in order to do this. But I want to give you all the opportunity to talk about this and to talk about ways that this might play out in your classrooms or your programs. All right, I think most you chatted about that characteristic in your group, feel free to unmute and let us know what you talked about, or type in the chat box. But did anyone talk about expressing care and what you could do to kind of foster that in your classroom or your program? Who had that discussion?
Hi. We had a very good discussion about expressing care. We had a lot of different ideas. One that was brought up was having maybe snacks for those kids who don't have breakfast or you know, things like that. I allow them to bring snacks for the afternoon because they have lunch at 10:40, and having some available for kids that didn't bring it. We also said, you know, like to greet, to welcome our students at the door, be ready for them, be interested in how their day is going, that kind of thing. Also conferencing on one-to-one on different one-on-one on different things, you know, that either achievements or challenges, so that they have that growth mentality. Also, another person said that they use the Remind app, and a lot of times the kids would reach out to them through the app where they wouldn't in front of all their other peers. So we have a lot more, but I'll let someone else talk.
Those are all awesome. Thank you for sharing those. Before somebody else
I
jumps.
wasn't sure if, okay, here we go.
I just wanted to read a few that were in the chat box. So somebody said hall greetings, attending extracurricular events. That's a great one. Morning greetings, one-on-one conferences. Again, attending extracurriculars, journals or prizes for classroom store. It said we felt that expressing care happens naturally in everyday situations, and that it's a two-way street for sure. And we do have a lot of that, right? Like that seems like the one when we talk about developing relationships, that's kind of the key component that we think of automatically. So I agree with that completely. Participating in events and weekends and after school, the gathering ideas, yeah, that's absolutely right. So let's see, our school has breakfast bars. So again, attending to physical needs, those snacks or food in case a kiddo is hungry, and you know, it's hard to concentrate when you're hungry. Celebrating birthdays, that's a great one. With homemade trail mix and movie time, that's awesome. And students love being celebrated for sure. Who else wanted to speak up and chat a little bit about what they talked about with expressing care? Okay, what about challenging growth? What did you talk about for, if you were in a group that was talking about challenging growth, what did you come up with for that one?
I had a group with challenging growth. We agreed that we would encourage the students, and my encouragement would be to let them know that education will be a way to get out of their environment. I teach students in the inner city, And the barriers for that will be that a lot of them have low self-esteem. A lot of them don't are not on grade level when it comes to their education. They also it takes a long time to get them up to grade level. Lots of them are low income, and that may keep them from coming to school regularly to get the education they need, because they might need to take care of their children, or they may need to help out in the family in a financial way. Also, they deal with peer pressure, and that can also have a toll on them, taking in the encouragement and continuing their education.
Yeah, absolutely right. And encouraging that, not only encouraging that in how you relate to them, but just developing those relationships shows that their motivation to come to school will increase, that they'll work harder, that they will be more persistent and more resilient. So yeah, like the developmental relationships can help overcome so many, or make impacts in beginning to overcome so many of those barriers. And yeah, just letting them know that you are there, that you believe in them, that they can go farther is huge. So perfect. Any other ideas on what about providing support? Any groups that talked about providing support? And a lot of these we'll find are intertwined. You know, the for instance, snacks that we've talked about can be seen as expressing care and providing support, right? Like you are attending to their needs, you're helping give them what they need as far as support, but it also shows that you care. So providing support, in the chat box, it says it does not just mean academically. Absolutely. It can stand on a more personal level, standing in the hallway before class so they can talk to you, sitting with them at lunch, playing with some of them at recess, noticing and listening to their conversations and behaviors. Yeah. Are they getting picked on? Are we encouraging them to do their best? Do they have someone to sit with at lunch or play with at recess? Those are huge. More inviting students to free tutoring at lunch once a week, that's awesome. So giving them that little extra attention that they need in order to be successful. Communicating with students and parents jointly via Google Classroom, that's awesome. Anybody else have more to add about providing support? Checking in on kids, both at home and at school, absolutely, that's a big one. What about sharing power? Who had conversations around sharing power?
We talked about creating rules and norms in the beginning of the semester. So perhaps, you know, creating the syllabus together, what the kids would like to see in the classroom. One of the teachers said that it's basically the teacher trying to get to know the students rather than the students trying to get to know each other. So it's almost like the students are the experts here rather than us. And then I mentioned discussions, so having a lot of conversations, having the students hear their voices just as they're hearing our voices. I personally hate lectures, and I hate being the only one ever talking. So to be able to have conversations, be able to relate it to their own lives and to the real world, into their interests, I think that that could help provoke deeper interest in whatever is being talked about, and also giving the autonomy that we're looking for in the classroom. And then another teacher mentioned check-ins. So if she is feeling that the emotions in the classroom are kind of at an all-time high and students aren't really focusing, she'll just stop what's being taught at the moment and say, okay, what's going on? What can we talk about? How can we help you get back to where we need to be? How can we tend to your emotions before we can attend to the learning?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I love how kind of all of the things that you talked about are so intertwined with all of the characteristics, right? Like you are sharing power by giving them a voice, by giving them a say, by making them feel like they matter and they have agency, but you're also providing that support that they need and expressing care. So I love that all of these things, like each characteristic doesn't stand in isolation. A few more of the things that were said in the chat box. One group talked about helping prepare for job interviews, which is awesome. project roles and group assignments. So allowing students to choose the text for a unit or give them options for products. Peace circles, absolutely. So letting them have a voice and be heard. One-on-one conferencing again, to suggest students' next actions. So somebody mentioned for sharing power that they could also have a student help teach a lesson. Absolutely, giving them, again, that voice and expecting them to succeed in a leadership role is huge. And somebody else said, we sometimes use morning meetings to speak about issues that the students may have wanted to share, setting the stage for our students, help them express themselves. Absolutely. And finally, expanding possibilities. How can we work on this more? Who talked about this a little bit? So in the chat, it says expanding possibilities by talking about their potential, creating safe spaces for them. Safe spaces help students share information. Absolutely. Anything else on expanding possibilities? Going beyond the curriculum, goal setting, having accountability partners, those are huge. Introducing publication opportunities. Yeah, that's awesome. So as I was exposure to external resources, speakers from the outside community, career days, those are all huge. And as I was kind of looking at expanding possibilities, I was thinking to our first Teacher Tuesday summer session where we heard from a panel discussion of educators who are doing this work around STEM, right? Who are bringing in guest speakers and helping kiddos look at jobs in STEM careers and things like that. And so if you weren't on that call, I encourage you, we've got it posted, a recording, or you can email us for that. And they had great ideas. Those teachers had phenomenal ideas on how to expand those possibilities around STEM. Just a few more: connecting students with resources, job interviews, scholarships, college tours, absolutely. Field trips, and sharing your own interests and hobbies. I love that. Very cool. So thank you all for doing such an amazing job brainstorming and kind of thinking about those excellent ways that you as a teacher can continue to do that. Because as Judy said, I don't know that we really have time to think about that all the time, like, and be intentional about that. But before we get started, we are going to talk about one more video. And I'm going to turn it back over to Judy for this.
Great. So we kind of started the discussion this afternoon in the session thinking about people that have been influential in your own life and the relationships that have been important to you. And so this video really also looks at that same topic of who has helped be successful and really recognizing them. So it's a video just sharing about how you can recognize those people who have impacted your life.
Hi, sir. How are you doing?
Doing all right.
Have you thought about your success?
I have not.
No. Excuse me, sir. Have you ever thought about your success and who's helped you become successful?
No, not really.
Have you ever thought about your success and who has helped you become successful?
Haven't really thought about it.
This is surprising.
All right, y'all done? I am.
Okay.
So as you can see, we have a telephone booth here, okay?
Yeah.
What I want you to do is I want you to call Zeta, and I want you to read this letter to her out loud.
Okay, here goes.
Hey, it's Faith.
Hello, Dad.
Hey, baby, this is Mom.
It's gonna be weird a little bit, but we are shooting a video here. Don't curse, okay?
I wrote a little letter because you motivate me daily, and I just wanted to say thank you.
There's so much that I could say to you right now.
Thank you for being there for me all the time.
You always ask how your mother's doing. Just checking in is so helpful.
You're a strong woman that raised me to be the man that I am today.
You've helped me so much achieve one of the greatest dreams I've had, to own my own place. You've had my back through everything, even when I'm questioning who I am or what I'm doing.
Oh my gosh.
I will always remember how proud you were when I graduated high school and then college.
I appreciate you for thinking about me before thinking about yourself. This is why you are my friend, brother, business partner for the rest of my life.
You always remind me of my greatest self in showing love and gathering people together.
I love you more than you will ever know. Hugs and kisses, Mommy.
I love you too, Mom.
Aww.
I know this is not something that I usually say, but just wanted to call you and tell you that.
Take care, I love you, brother.
Okay. All right, bye.
Thanks for always being there.
Oh, babe. I believe in you wholeheartedly, and I couldn't have done this with anyone else.
Thanks, Dad. I really appreciate that. It means a lot. Well, I'll talk to you later.
I love you forever, and thank you for being you.
I love you too. Bye.
Bye.
Come on, Dad!
She was shocked.
How did that make you feel?
Amazing. Thank you for allowing me to have this kind of experience.
You're welcome. Give me a hug, Faith.
So that's just kind of a feel-good video that just really helps us reflect on people that have maybe impacted us. So especially during this time when we're a little more socially distant from each other, we challenge you to think of somebody who's impacted you and just reach out to them and tell them how they impacted you and your life. So before Emily shares these resources, I just wanted to point out one other thing that's in the Kent Peckel article, Moving Beyond Relationships. There is an intentionality tool in that article that just kind of helps you as an individual kind of rate yourself in each of the different categories and think about where you spend more attention, like where you put more attention in your classroom, and then also how you personally think you can add it in and with which groups of people. So I know it always helps me to like kind of have an action plan when I'm thinking about making changes. So that article does have those tools in there if you are interested in that.
Yeah. So as we mentioned, the Search Institute also has really great resources around this. So they have an entire section on their website about developmental relationships because it's an area that they're pouring a lot of time and intentionality into, and continuing their research and all of their studies, as well as developing full programs around increasing this in programs and in schools. So take a look at that. A lot of our resources, as Judy mentioned, came from there. And they also have amazing professional development opportunities that are longer and more thorough than this one. And so I encourage you, if you have the time and the means, to engage in those, because they really do a great job. Judy and I both were able to attend a professional development session that the Search Institute put on, and it really was phenomenal and very helpful. So be sure to do that. Some of the articles that I referenced were there as well. We will be sure to send this recording out, as well as we'll have links to both the recording and to some of our links and resources, so you can have those and follow up on those as we go, because I know you can't click on these links right now. But feel free to let us know if you have any other questions, and feel free to put those in the chat or unmute and ask, but we would love to answer any questions that you guys have now. And so somebody said that video made me cry. You are not alone, my friend.
Makes me cry every time I watch it.